Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by my friend, Coach Mark Gray-Mendes, Thomas Jefferson High School in Alexandria, Virginia's head basketball coach for the men. He's also the Director of Development and Outreach at the TJ Partnership Fund. And very recently in the last year, he's added on PA announcer for the Bowie Baysox and the Orioles organization to his list of duties. He's been on the podcast before, but it's been a while. Coach, thanks so much for joining me, man. It's so fun to have you back on.
It's great to be back on, Billy. Always appreciate it and glad to be friends for such a long time.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to my high school days, and it's been almost 10 years since I graduated high school, so it's been a long time.
Yep,
But
even longer than that because you got started real early on the mic over there.
yeah, for sure. And you were always one of my biggest supporters, even though you were an opposing coach, which I'll always appreciate as well. But let's get right to it, Coach. The Final Four for both the men and women is right around for us coming up this weekend. We look at the men's side. I mean, first of all, it's been such a great tournament as always. We've had a few upsets here and there. You sprinkle in an Oakland and a Yale, but as we get to our Final Four, man, we've got some great storylines. On one side of the bracket, you've got the number one overall seed, UConn. First of all, they're the first defending champion in I think 6 years to even make it past the Sweet 16. So pretty impressive already in and of itself. They're taking on Alabama. I mean, we always talk about Alabama as a football school, but here they are as a basketball school, being in the Final Four. And then the other side of the bracket, you've got Shades of 1983, the NC State Wolfpack, number 11 seed, taking on the number one seed Purdue. A lot of great storylines. Obviously, you've got UConn and Purdue, the one seeds. You've got Alabama, who's a four seed, but kind of coming on as a basketball school. And then you've got the historical Cinderella NC State in the Final Four. So, Coach, what are your thoughts on the Final Four overall and just the tournament in general? I mean, it's been another successful tournament, and I think we're looking forward to a really exciting weekend coming up here.
I think it's amazing. We've seen so many double-digit seeds now reach the Final Four the last several years. NC State is just, the last one on the list and a team that, probably shouldn't have even been in the tournament in the first place. I had the chance to go see the ACC semifinals. My alma mater is University of Virginia, and so I went over there to catch that semifinal with them and State and UVA. I mean, had the game won as much as you can, but a series of really, really rough mistakes down the stretch, missed free throws, silly fouls, and just mental lapses. Kind of handed the game to NC State and allowed that to turn into an overtime game. But it's really cool to see them take the momentum, and it seems like the country's really fallen in love with big boy DJ Burns Jr. So it's kind of fun to see whenever you have unique players in the tournament that can really capture the imagination of the folks who are watching it. Then and that's obviously a great thing. I think it's really cool that we're seeing sort of the back to the basket post player make a comeback this year in the game. You have Zach Edey from Purdue, who's obviously a monster. I mean, you can't help but watch him when he's on the floor. He's out there 7'4" and over 300 pounds. I remember watching him when he first came in as a freshman. Purdue's had kind of a long history of doing well with those really, those major 7-foot plus guys, Matt Harms before him and so on. And, you could see that there was talent there when he was a younger guy, but it's nothing close to the dominant force that he's become nowadays. And I mean, he's starting to move his feet really well on both ends of the floor. It's been a really, really cool thing to watch his development over the years as he's just gotten better and better and better. And, that's been fun. And I mean, UConn is just a death machine. They're incredible. Their run to the finals last year, I think they won every game by at least 15 points. It looks like they're on track to do that again this year. I think that semifinal matchup with Alabama is going to be a good one. Alabama has been one of my favorite teams to watch so far in the tournament. I actually had them picked to go to the Final Four this year. It was probably the best pick I had. The other side of the bracket is garbage, but I did have UConn and Alabama, so we're straight there. But Bama is a really fun offensive team to watch. I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues at TJ earlier about this, but they have Nate Oates is obviously a phenomenal coach, but at the same time, he hired a guy from kind of the international game, a guy named Ryan Pannone, to run his offense, and extremely analytically driven. And there's a lot of European influence in the way that they play. Obviously, a high volume of threes, space the floor, penetrate, and a lot of ball screen action. But that's been really cool to watch. And for a guy who has Nate Oates' profile, to essentially turn over one whole side of the ball to this guy, who has international experience, G League experience, and so on, has been really, really cool to watch. So seeing that dynamic, as a guy who has a lot of the success that we've had at Jefferson, I owe to the fact that I've had two tremendous lieutenants in Jake Boltersdorf and Mark Travis for all 14 years that I've been the head coach. To see a guy get that much responsibility has really been very, very cool. And he's starting to, maybe it's just in the Twitter sphere that I pay attention to among coaches, but he's really getting a lot of the credit that's well deserved for how great their offense has been to watch. All that being said, it's really hard to see how anybody stops UConn this year. They can just beat you in so many ways, and they're so dynamic on both ends of the floor. I think it's going to be Connecticut and Purdue in the final, and I think the big difference is going to be Connecticut's transition game. They get up the floor so fast, and they hit you so early in transition, and I don't think Edie is going to be able to stick around in that kind of a game.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. So many great storylines, like you talked about at UConn. I think the most impressive thing about it, like you mentioned, going back to last year's tournament, they have not won a game by less than 15 points. I mean, they've just completely one-sided, dominated people. Of course, Alabama, just sickening. They were so great at football. Now, all of a sudden, with Nate Oates in there, they were the number one overall seed last year in the tournament, and this year they're able to make a run in the Final Four. You talk about NC State. I mean, first team ever, by the way, to win the AC tournament, 5 games in 5 days. And then they go on this run. And really, I mean, Oakland's the only team that had a chance to beat them. Everyone else has been a pretty, 10, 12-point wins. I mean, it hasn't really been close in terms of the scoreboard. And then maybe Purdue has a similar UVA redemption type story. I mean, you remember in 2018, 16 seed, UMBC defeated number 1 seed UVA. And then the next
Thanks for the reminder, Billy. I appreciate that. I always appreciate that being brought back to my attention. But seriously, I mean, that's been a thing that it kind of tugs at my heartstrings a little bit. So, if I'm going into the Final Four and I'm rooting for somebody, it's probably going to be Purdue exactly for that reason, because I know for that for our fan base what that felt like. Going from kind of the absolute embarrassment of going down in the first round like that, and then to come back the next year and be at the highest heights. For that to happen again would just be unbelievable to see. And so that's and Matt Painter to me seems like a real coach's coach. So that would be a really cool thing for me to see.
Yeah, so I mean that redemption arc potentially could be of the case. I was going to ask you about Matt Painter. I was thinking about this actually watching the Elite Eight between the Purdue and Tennessee, where you've got maybe the two best coaches in Painter and Rick Barnes who have never won a championship. Do you think Matt Painter's at the top in terms of best coach in the game without a championship?
Man, that's a really good question. I would say he definitely has to be pretty high on that list. I believe this is his first Final Four as well. And so, that's going to be a really cool story to see. But I've been really impressed with his teams for a long time. He always finds ways to design his offensive game plan against very specific pieces and for his very specific pieces that he has. And obviously, there's not really a coaching manual for how to be as efficient as you can with a 7'4" dude. Like that's not something that comes around very often. So to see how he's been able to use his group in a really innovative way has been really cool to see. And like I said, the development has been fun to watch, and there are so many other good players on that team that are enjoyable as well. But yeah, I would say he'd have to be pretty high on that list for me in terms of guys that have never won a championship. But there are so many good coaches, up and down the breadth of college basketball. When you're in the position to, as I was with Nova Cavaliers for years, you really get to know the Division III landscape. And there are some really tremendous coaches who are just starting to bubble up and get their opportunities. A guy I had a chance to interact with a few times, a guy named Josh Leffler, was the head coach at Johns Hopkins for a number of years. We had conversations back and forth about some of our guys that he was thinking about recruiting. He moved on to become an assistant at Cincinnati for a couple of years under Wes Miller. And then now he is just now got hired as the new head coach at Loyola of Maryland. So he'll be back up in Baltimore, which is a really, really cool thing. I'm looking forward to seeing how he does. But that's, we tend to spend so much time focusing on Division I because that's obviously what gets the TV ratings. But there are tremendous coaches all across the spectrum. And I think one of the coolest things about this tournament is that, if I'm not mistaken, 3 of the coaches that are in the Final Four were high school coaches at some point, which to me, there's sort of a hard ceiling sometimes where the guys who are high school coaches don't necessarily get those opportunities to move forward. But it's really cool to see guys get opportunities like this.
Yeah, I was actually reading it earlier today. Kevin Keats, the North Carolina head coach. First of all, I mean, he was about to get fired if they didn't win the AC tournament. He ends up winning. It triggers
Yep.
a 2-year extension, a pay raise. But his first head coaching job was at Hargrave Military Academy, where he drove the
Mm-hmm.
team bus and washed the jerseys himself.
Yep.
And here he is in
Right
the
here in
Final Four.
Virginia.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
And
It's very, very cool. And I mean, look, one of the first games that they won in the tournament, they won their first round game, but then the next round they go and beat Clemson.
yeah.
And Clemson had a great run into the Elite Eight as well. Just some tremendous performances. Brad Brunell, another guy who's an awesome coach. The ACC was sneaky good, and I know that's starting to become a narrative now, just across the board in terms of the tournament performance. Maybe next year we'll get a few more teams in the dance. We got to get both of our teams in there next year. Got to get Tech back in there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, I mean, how does it seem? Because I remember actually I was watching a little bit of the last podcast you were on, and you said the same thing. The ACC was disrespected, and it happened again this year. I mean, you talk about it, 4 teams in the Sweet 16, 3 teams in the Elite Eight. How do you think this keeps happening where you see the ACC, maybe not having the best regular season in terms of, the metrics, but then in the tournament, it keeps going on these great runs? I mean, it seems like this is a multi-year narrative of the ACC overperforming in the NCAA tournament.
I think it's 2 things. I think number one, it's a function of how much fluidity there is now in rosters in college basketball. So you've got, you're hearing now, obviously, the transfer portal is exploding. You and I were talking earlier about what's going on with Tech in that area. It hasn't quite hit UVA yet, but I have a feeling any one of these days now we're going to see a couple of announcements. But at the beginning of your season, you're basically working with a brand new roster every year. And in the early part of the season, you're playing some of these non-conference games that are having a humongous impact on your tournament resume, but you're playing them with essentially a brand new team. And I think that has a major impact. And so the second piece of it is, number one is the fluidity. Number 2 is coaching, because you have such tremendous coaches in the ACC from top to bottom. I'm not just talking about, John Shire or Hubert Davis or whatever, but guys like Jeff Capel, guys like Brownell, like we talked about, Mike Young at Virginia Tech, and just across the board, you have such good coaching that these ACC teams are genuinely better teams at the end of the year than they were at the start. And I think that's one of the things that we might have to take a look at as the tournament sort of selection committee moves forward, because I think some of these rankings like the net and, BPI or whatever it is that we're using, I think they might be impacted a little bit too much by some of those early season games when teams are still figuring out their rosters. I'm sure I'm not the first person to make that point, but the ACC has always been a meat grinder. It's been one of the best conferences in college basketball for years. It still, attracts a ton of talent. And so, to me, I think that's the biggest reason is you just have a really good league with a lot of different styles of play. I don't know that there's really a style of play in the ACC anymore. It's the Big Ten. You see a lot of kind of meat grinder, 50, 60 point games. Pac-10, 12 is always a little bit more up and down, a little more loose. SEC, tons of athleticism. The ACC, you've got all kinds of different programs that approach the game in so many different ways. And to me, that's the biggest reason why those teams are so prepared for March, is because that's what the tournament is you're going to come together on an opponent and who knows, what their style is going to be. And you've got to be prepared to handle that. It's a very different ball game playing against Notre Dame one night and then playing against Louisville the next night and then Duke the next night and then Clemson the next night. It's contrasting styles. And so I think that's a big part of it.
So in terms of Final Four predictions, you're going with UConn over Purdue. You're not buying the NC State hype, or maybe the Alabama can upset a UConn?
I think Purdue is a little bit too efficient offensively. I don't think NC State is going to have a real good answer for Zach Edey. And they're going to have to commit a ton of attention, and that's going to open up the perimeter for some of their excellent shooters that they have. I think UConn and Alabama are going to be 2 teams that are going to look very similar in terms of how they approach the game, especially on the offensive end, but that UConn just has that tournament, that championship DNA. Guys like Klingon and Caravan and those guys, they're going to carry the day, I think. And then once you get to the final, like I said, I think that Purdue wants to play a little bit more of a half-court game, and UConn is, I think, going to run them off the floor a little bit with their transition game.
I don't know, Coach. I mean, you look at NC State, you're kind of feeling like, 83 surviving advance, Jim Valvano, team of destiny. And I was actually looking at it, and I hate to bring this up again to you as a UVA guy, but in 83, NC State beat UVA in the AC tournament and beat UVA in the Elite Eight to get to the Final Four. This year,
Yep.
NC State beats Duke in the tournament and ends up beating them again in the Elite Eight. I don't know. It's just something about them that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe the sports gods have them in their favor. So I'm going to be a sucker for the underdog. I'm picking NC State over UConn. I think, UConn's kind of like Houston, Pi Slamma Jamma. People thought they were unbeatable. You never know if a guy gets in foul trouble early. You never know how that can kind of impact the game. So I'm going NC State. I think they'll find a way ride the team of destiny here into the championship.
That's some small school, big heart energy right there.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
I like it.
Yeah, I did want to ask you also a few questions about the big picture in college basketball. So again, to recap, Coach is going UConn over Purdue. I'm going with maybe a slightly hot take, but a riskier pick in NC State over UConn. We've heard all this conversation, Coach, about the NCAA tournament, and people want it to expand to 96 teams. I think it's only a matter of time before it does happen because of money. But what do you think about that? Do you think they should expand to 96 teams, or do you like it as the way it is at 64?
I agree with you that it's going to happen at some point in the near future, because every decision that is made in college sports nowadays seems to be driven by money. And if they determine that the money is what's gonna do it, then so be it, I suppose. But no, I mean, I like the tournament the way it is. To be honest, I don't even know if I'm a big fan of the first four. I loved it when it was a nice, solid, little coherent, 6-round, 64-team tournament. And that, you spent all week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and you're pouring over your brackets and there are no games going on. Maybe you're watching a little NIT ball, whatever. And then on that Thursday at noon, boom, they throw the ball up. That's the first game, and you get going. With the first four now, you've got all these the extra games, and do you have your brackets finalized before the first four game, or you do it before the Thursday games, and so on. And I don't know. I think I'm a little bit on the side of that fewer teams makes a little bit better difference. I think that's the right number to where you can have a team that gets really hot at the end of the year, and they're able to get in and they're able to play really well. And I just don't know that you're going to add a whole lot look, realistically, if you're adding another, let's say it's whatever is 20, 28 teams to the tournament, where are those teams going to come from? They're going to come from the bottom rung of the major conferences. You're going to have leagues like the Big 12 where nearly everybody gets in. And then maybe you have one or two teams from these mid-major conferences, maybe some teams, it might create some space for, the school in a conference that's a one-bid league, and maybe they go undefeated in the regular season and they stub their toe in the championship game or something like that. Maybe you get one of those in. But I mean, essentially what you're doing is you're gonna end up taking the big dance and the NIT and just smushing them together, right? Like that's what is really going to happen. Is the NIT is 32 teams now, so you're going to have all of those in the mix. And I think if you look at the NIT, it's no offense to Virginia Tech, UVA should have been in that tournament too. But like I just don't know that would have made a better tournament,
And so, I mean, do you think the NIT is pretty much becoming irrelevant? Because I was watching that Tech Richmond game. I mean, it seemed like guys were checked out. I know the transfer portal's pretty much 24/7 these days. I mean, I really feel like we're headed to just the NIT being scrapped altogether. We already saw, I think, what was it, 6 or 7 teams that declined NIT bids. So I think it's only a matter of time, Coach, before we may see it eliminated completely.
I agree with you, and I think that's a shame. I love the statement that Coach Young from Virginia Tech made, where he said, no, we have an opportunity to play in it. We're going to go play in it. And I'm going to take another chance to coach my guys. And we're going to do that thing. I don't think anybody is really served by the transfer portal being open as early as it is. I don't necessarily see that as a big positive. It strikes me as weird that you've got, teams that are still competing in the NCAA tournament, and at the same time, they're fielding calls and they're going and checking out guys in the portal, so on and so forth. Like, I don't know, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Maybe that's me being an old school guy, but I don't see where it would be that bad for us to finish up the tournament and then for the portal to be open, and then we can do that business at that point. That doesn't seem to me to be too bad of a thing, and it's just now that you're starting to see guys commit and so on. And I also think it makes for a weird situation because I think it's really hard for kids who might want to explore getting into the portal who are still playing. Are they going to put their name in while their team's still in the dance, and is that going to be a distraction to everything? It's as though NBA free agency were allowed to start during the playoffs, right? Like I don't know. I think there's a reason that doesn't happen, and maybe that makes me an old fogey, and I'll get some hate for this on Twitter or something. But I don't know. I don't think it adds much for that to be a thing as early as it is.
Yeah, I used to think that the NIT was a great addition because a lot of times those games would be on the weekdays when the NCAA tournament wasn't playing. So you kind of had your mix on the weekend. You had the NCAA tournament games, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you could get that mix of really good NIT games of teams that just barely missed the tournament, but they're playing in a competitive NIT. But I think, like you said, the way it's going, it's going to be probably scrapped and eliminated eventually. But I wanted to ask you, Coach, this is maybe the number one question I wanted to ask you coming into this podcast, and that is, we've already talked about it, the transfer portal. I mean, it's completely changed the face of college athletics. And let me first say that I am for player mobility because for so often, first of all, players weren't getting paid until name, image, and likeness came along. But also, I mean, a coach could leave for a bigger contract and more money somewhere else, but the players were oftentimes stuck or weren't getting paid at all. So as a principal, I am for player mobility, but I don't know. I just feel like the way this has exploded, basically 24/7 player, a player can transfer in the portal. Just in terms of it's really messed up teams. You were talking about it. Every year it seems like you're coaching a new team. I mean, I saw the stat. Every single NC State player that played in the Elite Eight yesterday transferred from another school. I mean, it's just incredible how much this has changed the scope of college athletics. So what are your thoughts on the transfer portal? And are there any limitations you would put in terms of, if you do this, go to the transfer portal, this affects, something else? I mean, are there any new rules you would implement if it was up to you to put in on the transfer portal?
So if I were the czar, and I'm probably going to get some flame for this too, but what I would probably do is I would say, you can't do it after your first year at a school. So I would say unless the head coach leaves or is fired. So let's say you got a kid walking in as a freshman. Maybe they don't necessarily get the run that they think they're going to get. They don't necessarily have the opportunities, etc. I think that a lot of kids run into trouble when they're perpetual freshmen. So like if you're, let's say you're at UVA, right? And you don't get the minutes that you want to get. And then you go out and you enter your name in the portal and you go ahead and explore somewhere else. It may very well be that the reason why you weren't getting the minutes that you wanted was because, you're not as familiar with the system yet. You're not as, you don't necessarily have the chemistry with the guys or with the coaching staff or whatever it is. Maybe your body's just not as ready as it would be if you were in the weight room for another off season, whatever it is. But then now you're going to a new school, a new program where you've got to learn a completely new group of guys, a completely new system, and a completely new weight room and coaching staff and all of that business. And now you're asking that coach, who is going to get fired if he has a poor year, to invest time, energy, and minutes into you when he's not 100% certain if you're going to be the right person to lead them to victory in a given situation. So it's the margins are so thin in college basketball anymore that I think it's difficult for coaches to play guys that they're seeing for the first time. So you end up with kids now and they're at their second school as a sophomore. They're not happy with the minutes, but maybe they're having a conversation with the coach where it's, listen, you might be ready to really contribute next year because you're going to figure things out. But then the kid transfers again, and now they're in their third school at 3 years. They're going through that whole process all over again. I fear that, it's kind of like what used to happen back in the early part of the 2000s. We saw a lot of kids this was when you could go from high school directly to the NBA, right? We saw a lot of kids who frankly got really bad advice and ended up, that they would put their name in for the NBA draft. They'd hire an agent. They would lose their college eligibility. they'd end up getting drafted somewhere in the second round. They'd be somebody's lottery ticket. They'd go play an NBA summer league, and all of a sudden, they're playing against NBA bodies, and they realize, wait a minute, this is a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. And now basically their basketball career is over, or they're going to overseas to play in Europe or whatever it is. It puts everybody in a really difficult position when you've got all of this movement. That being said, I appreciate the fact that coaches have been able to do this forever. And so I do absolutely believe that if a player, is at their school freshman year and their coach leaves, that they should be able to explore other opportunities because the person who recruited them to the university is no longer there for whatever reason. And so, that's kind of how I would approach it. But I don't think it's a good thing that we have an enormous number of kids entering the portal. Any statistical analysis you see of it, you see so many of them that don't end up getting better opportunities the next year, and that don't end up, in some cases, even finding a home. And sometimes, these kids will do it and they'll enter the transfer portal with the possibility of returning, to the same program. And then maybe the spot's not there for them because the team and the program and the coaches had to move on. During the time in the transfer portal, the team has signed 3 or 4 other guys that were at other schools. And now all of a sudden, that's the end of the deal. There's no space for you anymore on the roster. So that's where I worry that when you have like 18, 19, 20-year-olds getting bad advice, we saw that with guys going too early to the NBA. And I worry that we're seeing it nowadays with the portal as well.
Yeah, I agree, Coach. And, I think we were texting about this. Sean Padula, who's Virginia Tech starting point guard, he's entering the transfer portal. And he tweeted out, I'm entering the transfer portal, see my options, but there's a very strong chance I will return to Virginia Tech for my last year. And to me, that kind of leaves a bitter taste in my mouth because to me, it kind of comes off like he's just shopping, seeing what's out there. And then if it's not good enough, he'll come back to Virginia Tech where he's already a starting point guard. I mean, it's not a question of, he's not getting enough opportunities. He's not getting the minutes. I mean, he is literally the starting point guard, and we see him, shopping around, seeing if there are better offers out there. So to me, that's where I don't like the principle of it. To me, where it's like, I feel like if you're going to enter the transfer portal in a way, almost you should be like, okay, well, that's it. I'm not coming back for good. I mean, that's kind of maybe a principle standpoint. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's a terrible analogy, but I imagine, entering like the husband transfer portal, but telling my wife like, hey, there's a really strong chance that I'm going to come back. Like that doesn't work. It just doesn't make sense. So I think that's a tough thing where, you're telling your school, you're telling your community, I'm going to go explore my options, but if I can't find anything better, then I'll come back to you. Like, I don't know, if I were a member of the Hokie fan base, that would seem a little gross to me.
And I have to ask you on this topic got a lot of attention a couple weeks ago when John Filipowski got injured in a court storming at Wake Forest. What are your thoughts on court storming? I mean, I court stormed at Virginia Tech, and there were never any issues because, first of all, they had the security guards get out there right as soon as the game ended, so it was very hard to get anywhere close to a player. Also, the way Castle is constructed, I mean, you have to jump over a literal wall to get on the court, so it's just harder in Castle in general. But I'm I don't really have a strong opinion of it. I mean, I'm for, college kids. Hey, you just beat a great team, storm the court and celebrate a win. But then on the other hand, I'm like, well, if you're putting guys at risk in terms of suffering injuries, especially if it's a big player like Filipowski, if he got seriously injured, I mean, that would have sucked for Duke to lose a guy right before the tournament. So I don't know that I have a strong opinion of it. How about you? Do you think court storming should be banned overall, or do you think that just more security needs to be put in place, essentially?
I think that's, as a, in my other life years ago, I used to do high school athletic administration at TJ. And, unfortunately, I don't know that we've ever had a situation where, we got a huge win. This actually happened when I was a player. I was a part of a court storming at TJ many, many years ago, back in 03. But it hasn't happened in a situation where like we had a great team that we were playing against. And we beat them and the kids stormed the court, all that stuff. Like that's never been a thing that's happened. To me, I think it's a part of the fabric of college athletics, but it is incumbent upon these schools. And especially, I mean, if you're a big school like Wake Forest, you have security personnel, right? So you're on the radio, you're on the on the PA if you need to, and you're calling all of the security personnel and all of the athletic administration personnel that you have, and you are making sure that you get the players and the coaching staffs and them protected. And I don't think it's that, that challenging. I mean, maybe I'm talking out of school, but it's, where the student section is, where these kids are going to be coming from, and you station people to funnel them onto the court in a safe manner. And you station them to where they're able to take care of the handshake line and make sure that that's all dealt with properly. I know it can be difficult, but I mean, when you have a big crowd coming to a big game, I think that was on a Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like, you should be able to anticipate that on some level. I don't know. That's a disappointing failure to me in terms of athletic admin, knowing that it's not the easiest thing in the world, but at the same time, like, it's Duke. Like, if you beat Duke, you're going to have a court storming. That's just the way it is. What I have, I don't know. I have a little bit of trouble when when the coaches are talking about we should ban court storming. You can criticize the security apparatus, but like, let's not take the fun out of college athletics. It just, I don't know. It seems to me like it's a part of the game. So, the kids should be able to have a fun time. And for as much as we talk about money being so big a factor in college athletics anymore, really, I mean, what makes it fun is the student sections, and in some cases them getting after each other, and them bringing all the energy and the passion that they have for the school that they're at. So to me, I don't want to ban court storming. I just want us to handle it better and for us to anticipate things properly.
I agree with you. I mean, these colleges, especially these big D1 schools, make a bunch of money. Let's stop being cheap. Pay for
Right.
security to be out there to get things in place in case a court storming does happen. I wanted to ask you about Tony Bennett. Obviously, he's a great coach and a guy that I'm sure you model yourself with after, I should say. And, he got a lot of flack this year in terms of, well, UVA, I mean, really, it seems like it's a couple-year trend of the offense really struggling to kind of get easy baskets. And obviously, fans were not happy with how they ended the AC semifinal that you were at when NC State kind of came back and beat them. You had the buzzer-beating three when they could have fouled to prevent a three. Of course, McNeely missed a free throw, and then who knows? NC State doesn't make the Final Four. Do you think the criticism is warranted? Because this is where I stand on it. First of all, Tony Bennett is as classy as a guy as you'll come in sports. I mean, he's the type of guy, even as a Tech fan, you like because he's just such a nice guy, very classy individual. And I'm to be clear, I'm not advocating that he be fired or anything like that, but I just think, it comes a point where I feel like this happens in college basketball, coach, where I don't think this happens in literally any other sport, where I feel like you win one ring and all of a sudden you kind of become untouchable. And I think the example I use for this is Gary Williams of Maryland. I mean, he won back in 2002 and then really didn't do much, after that. And he ends up being able to retire on his terms. Whereas in college football, Ed Orgeron was gone from LSU after 2 years. In baseball, John Farrell, 4 years after winning a World Series, was gone. I know it's not apples to apples directly, but just the feeling of you don't just get to be untouchable because you win one ring. So that's kind of where I stand on Tony Bennett. I'm not saying he has to be fired, but I do think I just don't like coaches being untouchable just because you win one ring, and he's probably going to have to make adjustments, especially in this transfer portal era. Where do you stand on Tony Bennett?
Listen, I am one of the UVA fans who's really glad that he's our coach. It's one of the great things about Coach Bennett is that he doesn't pretend like he's perfect or above criticism. When he goes and takes the microphone, and the best example I can give is when UMBC won that game. He stood in it and he took it, and and he said some great things about how if you have this tremendous adversity and you learn to use it the right way, then it can buy you a ticket to a place that you've never been before. And you're seeing that with Purdue this year, so on. My belief is he's the right coach for what UVA is as a school and as a program. You see this with the churn that we've had in football for years and years and years. It's really hard to win consistently at high revenue sports at a school like UVA. You have to have the right person in place who can balance the responsibilities that the kids have from an academic perspective, the expectations of the community in terms of how you conduct yourself. UVA is, let me put it this way: it thinks very highly of itself in many ways, and that's not something that will be a surprise to you to hear. But there's a certain way that you're supposed to handle yourself when you're a member of that community, and he's a perfect person to do that. And he brings kids onto campus who are going to do that, and who are going to be good models for the UVA community. They're high character guys. If they don't fit in well with the program, they end up moving on. It's just that's the way it is. I think that the way that the style of ball that Bennett is famous for, with blocker mover offense, pack line defense, can be successful still in this era of college basketball in terms of on the court. Where I'm worried is whether it can be successful in the recruiting process and whether it can be successful in keeping guys there year over year. And that's just part of the reality. I think you spoke to it a minute ago with how you asked the question. And I think you were sort of pushing it towards this direction where, it's not necessarily easy to get a big excited about going out there and setting 4 or 5 screens on every single possession, and being that guy. And so, it's not necessarily that sexy to have the ball for 25 seconds every possession and keep running guys off screens over and over and over again. That being said, it is the type of system where if you stick with it and if you're in the program for a couple of years, then you have a great chance to be really successful with it. And that's what you saw with guys like Ty Jerome and Kyle Guy and DeAndre Hunter, obviously. Like DeAndre Hunter redshirted when he was a freshman at UVA, right? And then he came back. He was a freshman for the first year when they lost to UMBC, and then he came back for his sophomore year and ended up becoming a lottery pick the next year. So and then Ty Jerome has been a two-way guy with Oklahoma City for a lot of years, and Kyle Guy's been bouncing around a little bit. I think in the end he's probably going to be like a knockdown European player at some point in the distant future. But yeah, like I think that style of ball can win, but they're going to have to find a way to make it attractive by making some tweaks or whatever it is, so that kids are excited to come to UVA and that they're excited to stay there once they get there. And we'll see. I mean, the proof will be in the pudding. We had a great kid, tremendous athlete, kid named Elijah Gertrude, this year at UVA, who you probably haven't heard of because he didn't get many minutes. He was supposed to redshirt, and then they burned his red shirt early in the season because they had an injury to the backup point guard, Dante Harris. And so he got a little bit of minutes here and there. He played some in a blowout at UNC, but actually injected some real energy into the game. And so there are a lot of UVA fans who are like, man, we really hope this guy comes back, because if you give him the keys to the engine next year, then he's got a chance to be something really special. We'll see if he decides to do it, but it's stuff like that that sort of makes you not hesitant, but hopeful that the program can evolve in the way that it needs to. But all that being said, I mean, there's nobody I would rather have running the UVA basketball program than Tony Bennett, and I think most of the people in UVA fandom in general would agree with that. And it's not necessarily because of the ring. It's because of the way that he runs the program and how strong a representative of the University of Virginia that program is.
No, I agree with you. He's certainly class personified as well. Coach, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you one question about the women's game. I don't know how closely you followed the tournament, but I think it's been so exciting this year. You see Caitlin Clark, you see LSU trying to go for a repeat. I'll be watching that game later tonight. You've got South Carolina undefeated, UConn still in the mix. And a lot of people said that, this was a year where in a lot of ways the women's tournament was more intriguing than the men's. For me, I think partially, I got more interested because Virginia Tech had such a good team. I mean, Final Four last year, you had a second round appearance this year where, last 2 years, the tournament was literally hosted in Blacksburg, which I think kind of pumped up the excitement. I'm just worried, though, do you think this is a one-shot wonder? Because you've got, I think, the big star like Caitlin Clark. You've got the great teams like a South Carolina and LSU. Do you worry that if it kind of, once Clark leaves and maybe some of these big name players leave, that it kind of goes down a little bit back to where the popularity was before? Or do you think that this type of popularity can be sustained? I mean, is there anything you think the women can really do to kind of continue to increase that popularity and really show people what kind of a great game it is?
So I think that the biggest thing that is going to keep women's basketball and women's sports in general relevant in the college landscape is actually the NIL piece. Because I think what you're going to see is, as these women that, they run out of college eligibility, like, I mean, let's be serious. If the WNBA was as lucrative compared to women's college basketball as the NBA is compared to men's college basketball, you would see Caitlin Clark in the WNBA right now. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think she is still at Iowa because she has eligibility, because there are things that she still wants to accomplish. But at the same time, now she's in a situation where she can actually make some serious money that would probably compete on some level with what her WNBA salary will be down the road. And so you've got this incentive now for women's college basketball players to be able to make a name for themselves, because now they can be marketed in a much different way, which expands the appeal of the game and expands the amount of eyes that are on these individuals. And to me, you have a lot more continuity there. Who knows if Angel Reese would still be at LSU if the women's game were like the men's game in terms of the way the transfer portal works out, or to me, that's a big piece of why that's happened. And so I think it's a great thing for women's sports in general. My great hope is that the popularity of these superstars translates to the WNBA as they move on to the next level. I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to see over the next couple of years. But at the same time, when we have all of this attention placed on these young stars on nights like tonight, you're going to end up with other players who end up making a name for themselves during that time period, and they become the next generation of stars. So to me, that feedback loop is really moving in a positive direction right now. And I think that, the big thing for me that I've seen is that we're actually investing time and energy and platforming women's athletics in a way that we haven't in years past. That to me is another big difference, is that people are committing the time and energy to it. And what's being discovered is, wow, this is actually a pretty good product when we know where to find it, and when networks are deciding to broadcast it, and when it's being marketed properly, and so on and so forth. And so, hopefully that feedback loop is going to continue with these superstars, and that people are going to go, from being Caitlin Clark fans to being fans of whatever WNBA team she ends up on in the future. And then more money funnels into the WNBA as a result, because you get more eyeballs on the product. Now all of a sudden there's a greater revenue stream, and now these contracts can start being a little bit more competitive, and we can start talking about those tremendous athletes being paid a little bit more in line with what they probably should be earning.
That's definitely a great perspective to have. Two questions before we get to your Orioles. What are your thoughts on the shot clock? Should it be implemented in high school basketball?
100% yes, absolutely. A lot of people will be surprised when I say that, because TJ, not so much this past year, because we were a pretty strong team this past year, but most years we are not necessarily the most talented team on the floor in a lot of games that we play, and people believe that the shot clock helps us to remain competitive. For whatever reason, they think, oh, well, you can hold the ball, you can shorten the game. Realistically, and you've seen this back when I used to play over at Marshall, if we would start holding the ball, Coach Hale would get up and he would press us, and he would try to turn us over, right? I mean, that's just the way it worked. And if we were lucky enough to break the press, then back there is going to be Jack Foley and Jordan James, and they're probably going to swat us off the backboard, and they're going to go the other way. What it allows us to do, what the shot clock would allow us to do, is to be able to continue playing defense the way we want to play it for a longer period of time in the game. If we are in a situation where we're down by, let's say 6 with 4 minutes to go, and we've been having whatever defensive success we've had in the game has been because I've been playing the 2-3 zone that you probably saw a ton when you were over there on the mic, or the pack line man-to-man, or whatever it is. The bottom line is, if a good team decides they want to hold the ball at half court, you now have to come out and you have to chase the game if there's no shot clock. And so that means we have to foul earlier. We have to play the terrible free throw game that you see. That's the worst thing about basketball nowadays. And I will say this also, you want a hot take. The Elam ending should be the way all basketball games end. You heard it here first. I think that we should scrap the clock in the last 4 minutes. We should go to the Elam ending like they use in the TBT and the NBA All-Star game a couple of times. And that would eliminate the horrible free throw contest that you see at the end of some of these games. And every single game would end on a walk-off. But that's another story entirely. There's your hot take for the night. You can clip and save that and make that your Twitter highlight. But yeah, it's we absolutely should have the shot clock, and whatever I can do to try to move us further in that direction, I would like to see that happen.
Coach, I knew you were all for it. I saw your Twitter thread, so I just teed you up for that one, so you could go off. I got to ask you a fun question. And we've seen this on all levels, really, not just high school, but also college and the NBA. Is that suits have really gone away since COVID happened. Coaches, I mean, I see you're wearing your TJ polo. Kind of coaches are kind of more opting for a polo or maybe some sort of a jacket of some sort. What's kind of your personal thoughts on why that went away? And is that something you think you'll bring back, or are you perfectly content with the polos or whatever other gear you've got going on?
I think for a real special occasion, maybe you might bust out the suit. And there are still some coaches who do it, and more power to them because it's a clean look. It looks sharp. You look like you're ready to do business. But at the same time, for me, it's a little bit of it is bringing us more in line with the players. We have in our coaches chat that we have before every game, they'll ask me, "Hey coach, what polo we're wearing?" And it's just a nice thing. Like, all the coaches were dressed the same. We're wearing our uniform for the game, just like the players are wearing theirs. We look like we have some solidarity. It allows us to have some fun with it. We have one of our polos where we have the word family is across the left sleeve. To me, it's just another way for us to feel a little bit more like a team and like we're doing things together. And then honestly, selfishly, it's comfortable. I am a guy who I will avoid any opportunity I can to wear an Oxford collar button down shirt. Like, I would prefer not to wear that. I like for my, you've watched me on the sidelines. I can be a little demonstrative sometimes with my hands, and it's easier to do that when you're wearing, something that allows you to move your arms around a little bit and so on. It's cooler. You get less sweaty. You remember Gary Williams, you were mentioning earlier, you get the big pit stains up and down, and nobody likes to see that. So I'm definitely a polo guy, and if you make me dress up, I'm probably going to wear a turtleneck because then I can wave my arms around like a maniac anyway.
Well, I have to ask you, Coach, a great discussion on basketball overall about your Baltimore Orioles. I mean, they're already off to a good start. The season took 2 or 3 from the Angels. Last year, they were 101-61. They ended up, unfortunately, getting swept by the Rangers, but who ended up winning the World Series. But overall, a successful season after years of rebuild. I know you were a hardcore fan even through all of that. And, they've got a great core this year. I mean, Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, Ced Mullins, Ryan Mountcastle. Corbin Burns, a huge addition from the Brewers in that trade. I think he's a Cy Young candidate. You signed Craig Kimbrell to pair with Felix Bautista in the bullpen. And yeah, I have a feeling sooner or later Jackson Holliday is going to make the big leagues. He's a well-known prospect. So what do you think about the team this year, Coach? And also can't be remiss to mention the new ownership. I mean, David Rubenstein, he brought in Cal Ripken Jr. to the mix. I've seen some other big names like Grant Hill's part of that ownership group. So a lot of things going great for Baltimore. Do you think this year is a World Series or bust?
No, I don't. And the reason is because the window is going to be open for a long time. So when you look at guys like, Adley Rutschman, I don't know how many of your viewers are going to be super familiar with how the arbitration structure in baseball works, but Adley Rutschman is going to be Orioles property for the next 4 years, unless there's a trade or something like that. Gunnar Henderson is going to be there for the next 5 years. You have all of these prospects who haven't even started their service clock, who are going to be part of the Orioles on the major league side for 5, 6 years, whatever it is. So the Orioles they benefit from being able to have this nice long window where they can expect to be competitive. One of the great pitchers, Grayson Rodriguez, had a phenomenal first outing, 6 innings, 9 strikeouts against the Angels. The Angels are not a great lineup this year, but you saw those first 2 performances were really dominant. So no, I don't think it's World Series or bust, but I do think that you're looking at a group that's going to be World Series contenders for the next several years. I think that the new ownership group is really exciting. It became, I think, the Orioles under Peter Angelos in the 90s were willing to spend. They were in the upper echelons of baseball from a payroll perspective in the mid 90s for a while. and we as fans were rewarded with playoff appearances in '96 and '97. When Davey Johnson was the manager for that reason. But with Mike Elias on board as the general manager, obviously I'm going to be a huge fan of that because Elias is a TJ guy. He and I went to school together for 2 years. He graduated in 2001, so for me that's incredible. And he's been amazing to us too. By the way, he did an interview for the Partnership Fund back a couple of years ago, right when the Orioles were starting to break into their competitive window. And then last year, he was very kind to host our whole baseball team out for an evening. We went to go see a game against the Pirates back in May of last year. He met all the guys, was talking with the parents, and so on and so forth. So he's been just tremendous. And with the new ownership on board, I think there's going to be a little bit more of a willingness to spend. I think the Angelos family got burned by the Chris Davis contract. That was, and rightfully so. I mean, that was a disaster and set the franchise back for a long time. But I think that with that sort of being in the rearview mirror, I think there's a better chance that you're going to see the team make the expenditures that they're going to need to make at the right moment. I don't know that that this is that moment necessarily right this second, but when you look at this upcoming offseason, I think you will start to see the Orioles be a player for intelligent free agent signings. And so I'm looking forward to that too. I think that, we've got one of the best front offices in the game, and, a team that's really on the leading edge of the analytics revolution. They had to catch up for a few years, but now I think they're starting to really set the standard in terms of how that's done on the player selection, identification, development side, and so on. And it's really exciting now to sort of be able to see some of that from the ground floor with what I'm doing for the Baysox.
That's awesome. And I want to, so I mean, I'm in my MLB preseason prediction, I said Orioles over Braves. Do you think they win the World Series this year? Or are you going to be a pessimistic fan and say no?
I don't know that this is necessarily the year. I won't be surprised if they do. But at the same time, if it's Orioles or the field, I'll take the field still. I think again, there's I do think they'll win the division. I think the Yankees did a good job of rebuilding, but I think that they are a little bit too reliant on too many guys who are injury prone and a couple of bad, you never root for this. But when you have a team that sort of has the age of the Yankees, then, you're sort of building a house of cards there that could really tumble at any moment. I think Tampa, the sort of migration of pitching out of that system is going to be something that they're going to have to deal with all year. And I think Toronto, they've just never been able to get the mix right. They've had a lot of talent for a lot of years. They've had this group with Bichette and Vlad Guerrero and Kevin Biggio, and those guys have been around for a while. But they just haven't seemed to be able to get the mix right. Like they'll win 87 games or 88 games again this year and either just barely make or barely miss the playoffs. And I just don't think they're built for sustained success. And Boston they're in the wilderness right now. So I'd rather be a Nats fan right now than a Red Sox fan, to be honest. I think that the Nats are trending in the right direction, but the Braves are still going to be the team to beat in the NL East. I think the Dodgers are obviously going to be the class of the NL West. The Central is going to be anybody's game. I think Cincy might be the pick there because they got all that young talent that had their first year under their belt. So, but I think picking the Orioles to reach the World Series is probably a decent pick. We'll see. Might still be a little bit too young, but you never know. If the team has the kind of improvement this year that they've had, during the course of the previous 2 years during the season, then anything's possible.
How many Orioles games do you get to go to per season? I know you were a partial season ticket holder at one point, and I'm actually curious, do you ever go to Nationals Park? I mean, it's closer to you geographically in terms of getting there. I mean, have you ever gone to Nats Park recently for even a Nats-Orioles game? I mean, it'd probably be easier to see the Orioles if you see them play in D.C.
Yeah, Allison and I try to get to at least one of the Nats Orioles games at Nationals Park every year. We did last year. We're planning to again this year. We've actually got a fun day planned. One of these days during that series, there's a Baysox game in the afternoon, and then the Nats Orioles game is at night. So we're going to do a little doubleheader and make a day of it. So it should be a lot of fun. I'm very fortunate to have a wife who is as enthusiastic about baseball as I am. So that's really cool. But yeah, I enjoy going to Nats Park. They've got some great food options. Especially if you're down there in the lower bowl, it's a good atmosphere. So yeah, it's an enjoyable time.
And in terms of Orioles games, I mean, how many, especially now with your
Oh yeah,
Baysox opportunities, how many do you get to go to per year?
yeah, so we used to be Sunday season ticket holders for the dark ages. So we were 2018, which we thought was going to be a good year, and turned into like the
Yeah.
45 and 117 or some nonsense. We actually had a pretty good record that year. Allison and I went like 8-8 that year. But so we had Sunday season tickets 2018, 2019, and then COVID, and then 21 and 22. Can't do it anymore with the Bay Sox thing, obviously. But yeah, it's we try to get to, I would say, like somewhere between 5 and 7 games now. It is tough making the trek up there, but we did just do it this past Saturday. Had a great time. The Orioles won. I think it was 13-4. So it was a blast, and there's a lot better energy in the stadium now, obviously, than it was back then. The only problem is that now the line for Boog's Barbecue is too long. So you can't just roll up there and get whatever you want for the food anymore. So that's the only negative. But other than that, it's really exciting, and I'm glad to see that the stadium, it is one of the crown jewels of baseball and of sports in general, Oriole Park at Camden Yards. So to see it with the kind of team that it deserves to have is really special.
Coach, you've been so gracious with your time. Before I let you go here, I wanted to ask you, of course, you talked about your association with the Bowie Baysox. Of course, you are in your second season as the PA announcer, and this is not, by the way, your first experience as a PA guy. You've done it for a while now as the voice of the Jefferson Colonials football team. How did this opportunity come up with Bowie? And obviously, it's big for you being an Orioles
Yeah.
fan. You get to work with their minor leaguers in their organization.
It is really, really cool. One of the coolest things I've had an opportunity to do, and I'm incredibly fortunate to have that opportunity. So it was, I went to Baysox games all through my time when I graduated from college. During the time I was single, a lot of times I wouldn't have much to do in the evenings, so I lived a little bit closer back in those days, and so I was like, oh, I'll go watch, some of the teams down there, because the major league club was not great. And so, you're kind of looking towards the future, and it's a great experience over there. Shameless plug, but I probably went to, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 Bay Sox games over the course of 15 years, give or take. And I remember they had an excellent PA announcer by the name of Adrienne Roberson. Robertson is her name, and the Orioles actually fired their PA guy early in, I think it was the 21 season, if I'm not mistaken. He got in trouble doing some social media stuff or whatever. And so they brought her up. And when that happened, I just kind of had a wild hair. I emailed their general manager and was like, hey, if you need someone to fill in, I have this experience, yada, yada, yada. They said, hey, we've got somebody in mind already. We've got it taken care of, but we'll keep you in mind. And so then right before the 2023 season, I saw them put out a call for auditions for a PA announcer. And I was like, you know what the heck? I'll give it a shot. I don't know if I can make the commitment to do, 66 to 70 games during the course of a year. But I'll drive out there on a Saturday. I'll give it a rip and see what happens. And so I did that. I read a starting lineup from the previous year and one of their ad reads that actually ended up being our seventh inning sponsor for the entire season. And I just, I gave it a rip. I was fortunate enough to be kind of an Orioles prospect nerd anyway, so I knew how to pronounce all the guys' names. And then that was it. And so I left. I didn't hear anything on Saturday. I didn't hear anything on Sunday or Monday or Tuesday. And then on the Wednesday, the guy who was their play-by-play broadcaster emailed me and said, hey, we want to offer you the position. And so I was like, wow, that's incredible. Let me talk to my wife about it. So I go home. I'm kind of hemming and hawing about it. Are we going to have enough time for this? Are you going to be okay at home and taking care of the dogs and so on? And she kept insisting, no, you have to do this. You have to do this. You've been wanting to do this for a long time. So go out and have fun and go do it. And so thanks to some relentless and needed pushing from my wife, I ended up going ahead and doing it. And like I said, it was just one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. I can't wait for opening day coming up here on Friday, taking on the Reading Fightin' Phils at 7:05 p.m. at Prince George's Stadium. So any of y'all, the Pulse listeners, feel free to come on out and enjoy yourself. Minor league baseball is a great time. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I believe you told me that I was the second person you told after Allison, so I was just honored
Yeah,
that I was in that group. So
of course, man. You were the other than me, you were the high school PA announcer that I most connect with. So that's there's a brotherhood, right?
yeah, that's right.
It's very very cool stuff.
And then the last question I had for you, you kind of just alluded to it, and you talked about it. You've been a minor league baseball fan for a long time, even before you started doing this PA gig. How would you describe the minor league experience, and what would you say to someone, especially in our area, the Northern Virginia area, in terms of trying to get them to come to a game? Because it's not just Bowie. I mean, there's so many, Fredericksburg. A lot of the minor
Hmm.
league teams for the Nats and the Orioles aren't that far away from the Northern Virginia area. So, how would you describe the minor league experience, and what would you say to someone and try to pitch them to get to come out to a game?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is it's good baseball, right? Like AA baseball is good baseball, and especially in in the way that the major league landscape is right now. A lot of times, what you're going to be looking at is a team's best young prospects. AAA is kind of the final stop before you get there, but AA baseball, you're always going to see a team's best prospect spend at least half a season there and really trying to sharpen their skills, and it's where careers are sometimes made or they flame out sometimes in those situations. But the ticket prices are reasonable. You're going to be able to sit really close to the field. I mean, you can sit in the front row for like $20 or less in a lot of cases. It's a great experience in between innings. They've got all of this entertainment that's going on in the field, and there's games and contests and all of that stuff that keeps your attention. The food and the adult beverages are reasonably priced. You're not paying $14 for a beer or whatever it is. And it's a really good time at Prince George's Stadium. Shameless plug, we have free parking, right? So you're not paying $25 or $50 to be able to park near the stadium. It's really really good baseball. It's a great product at an affordable price, and that to me that's the biggest advertisement that I can kind of give for it. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm part of that stadium experience. But we take a lot of pride in what we do at Prince George's Stadium to give an outstanding fan experience. Because one of the things we say is it's opening day for somebody. No matter what game it is, it's opening day for somebody in the stadium, and it might be the first or last opportunity they have to come see one of our games, and we try to give them as good an experience as we can. So I'm looking forward to doing that again for a whole new crew of Baysox supporters.
Coach, this has been such a pleasure. I was just looking at our timer. We went over an hour, but I feel like it flew by in 5 minutes. Thanks so much for your time. It's always great catching up with you because you're so well knowledgeable about so many different sports. It's always a pleasure. And I got to say, this is a shameless plug to Coach Lynn, who's, I'm a big fan of, and of course, is your buddy. You've been on 3 times. He has not been on yet. So I hope this is an opportunity maybe for me and Coach Lynn to do a podcast here. But thanks so
I
much for your
love
time.
it. No, of course. Hey, I love doing it. It's a lot of fun, and I'm always available. Please feel free to hit me up again, and looking forward to it. And Coach Lynn, definitely come on. Billy's a great listen.
For sure. Well, thank you so much to Coach Mark Gray-Mendes, the Thomas Jefferson High School head basketball coach, also the Director of Development and Outreach at the TJ Partnership Fund, and the PA announcer for the Bowie Baysox. Proud UVA alum, and of course, a big Orioles fan, for joining me on the latest edition of the Post with BP. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us. We hope you give us a listen, and we'll see you next time.